It was July 22, 2005, and the waters off the coast of Nassau, Bahamas, sparkled under the late morning sun. A group of eager tourists had signed up for a snorkeling trip, one of the highlights of any visit to the Bahamas, and the day had started perfectly. The tour group, led by two local guides, set out from a small marina on a coral dream boat bound for a popular snorkeling spot, known for its crystal-clear waters and abundant marine life. Among the tourists was 29-year-old David Carson, who was visiting from the U.S. with his fiancée, Emma Ward, to celebrate their engagement. It was supposed to be a day filled with beautiful memories. David was particularly excited. He had always been fascinated by the ocean, and the Bahamas was the perfect place to see some of its beauty up close. The couple had been looking forward to this trip for months, and everything about the day felt right. The guides had briefed the group on snorkeling safety, instructing them to stay together and avoid wandering too far from the boat. Bull sharks were known to frequent these waters, and while the chances of an attack were low, the guides emphasized the importance of sticking to the group. Bull sharks, notorious for their aggressive nature and ability to thrive in salt and fresh water, were often spotted around the Bahamas. Unlike other sharks, they could be unpredictable and were responsible for more attacks on humans than any other species. Their stocky build, powerful jaws, and strong swimming abilities made them particularly dangerous, especially when provoked or when food was scarce. As the boat anchored near a reef, the group eagerly jumped into the water, their snorkels and fins ready for the adventure. David and Emma were among the first to dive in, marveling at the bright coral and colorful fish that swarmed below. It felt surreal. Everything was peaceful, the ocean calm, and the group spread out around the reef, enjoying the underwater scenery. For the first hour, everything went smoothly. The group stayed relatively close, with the guides watching from the boat. But David, lost in the reef's beauty and unaware of the increasing distance between him and the others, had unknowingly drifted away. Engrossed in watching a school of fish, Emma hadn't noticed David's slow separation from the group either. David continued exploring farther from the boat's safety and out of sight of the guides. His breathing through the snorkel was steady as he glided over the reef, unaware of the danger lurking nearby. The dark shape of a bull shark appeared below him, just beyond his line of sight. It had picked up on David's movements, drawn by his splashing and the unfamiliar presence in its territory. The shark began circling from a distance, watching David swam farther from the group, completely oblivious that he was being stalked. It happened in an instant. As David adjusted his mask, unaware of the predator below, the bull shark surged forward, propelled by its powerful tail. In the blink of an eye, the massive shark was upon him. David felt a sudden, sharp pain in his right arm, and his body went rigid with shock. Looking down, he saw the terrifying sight of the bull shark's jaws clamped around his arm, its rows of razor-sharp teeth slicing through skin and muscle easily. Panic took over. David thrashed in the water, desperately trying to free himself, but the shark's grip was too strong. It pulled him under, the force of its bite dragging him beneath the surface. His lungs burned as he struggled to get free, the salt water filling his mouth as he fought to hold on to his breath. Blood clouded the water around him, feeding the shark's aggression. Still unaware of what had happened, Emma finally noticed that David was missing from the group. She lifted her head out of the water, scanning for him, and saw the thrashing in the distance. Panic seized her as she realized something was wrong. She called out to the guides, who immediately sprang into action, racing to get the boat closer to where David was struggling. Meanwhile, David was losing strength. The shark had let go of his arm but began circling him again, preparing for another strike. David, desperate and in excruciating pain, kicked out wildly, his mind racing with fear. He knew that if the shark attacked again, he might not survive. His arm was bleeding heavily, the pain nearly unbearable, but the adrenaline coursing through his body kept him moving. As the shark circled back, David grabbed the only thing he had, his snorkel. It was a weak defense, but at that moment, it was all he could think of. The shark charged again, its mouth wide open, but David struck it on the snout with the snorkel as hard as he could. Surprised by the sudden hit, the shark recoiled slightly but wasn't deterred for long. It circled again, this time closer, its eyes locked onto its target. By this time, the boat had reached David. Armed with a long pole, one of the guides leaned over the edge, shouting for David to swim toward them. The other guide grabbed a rope, ready to pull David aboard as soon as he was close enough. David, barely able to see through the blood and salt water in his eyes, kicked with every last bit of energy, his arm numb from the blood loss. The shark relentlessly followed closely behind, its dorsal fin cutting through the water as it prepared to strike again. Just as it closed in, the guide jabbed the shark with the pole, driving it back long enough for David to reach the side of the boat. The other guide pulled him aboard in one swift motion, and the group watched in stunned silence as the bull shark swam in circles below, still searching for its prey. David collapsed onto the deck, his body shaking from the shock and the pain. His arm was torn, the deep gashes from the shark's teeth a grim reminder of how close he had come to losing his life. Wide-eyed and silent, the rest of the tourists gathered around as the guides raced to stop the bleeding and radioed for emergency help. David would survive, but the scars, both physical and mental, would stay with him forever. The Bahamas, once a place of beauty and adventure, had shown its darker side, and David knew he would never forget the terror of staring into the eyes of a bull shark. It was a warm, quiet morning on August 12, 2001 in Boca Palms, a small coastal town in Florida. The beaches were mostly empty at this hour, with the sun just beginning to rise. For Eric Taylor, a 33-year-old local, this was his favorite time to swim. The water was calm, the air cool, and he enjoyed the peaceful solitude before the beach filled with people. Over the years, he had made this early morning dip a routine, often swimming alone in the shallow waters just off the coast. Eric parked his car and walked down the beach, feeling the sand between his toes as he headed toward the water. He wasn't a competitive swimmer, but strong and confident in the ocean. He had grown up by the beach, and the sea was like a second home. He waded into the water, sighing as the coolness refreshed him from the heat. There was no wind, no signs of danger, just the endless stretch of water inviting him farther out. Florida's waters were home to many sharks, though attacks were rare. Lemon sharks frequented these waters and were usually non-aggressive and avoided human contact, but they were also territorial. Lemon sharks were often hunted in the shallow waters where Eric was now swimming. Though they were not typically a threat, their powerful jaws could cause serious harm if provoked or threatened. As Eric swam out farther, unaware of the potential danger, he focused on his strokes, gliding smoothly through the water. He had the whole ocean to himself, or so he thought. The lemon shark lurking nearby, invisible beneath the surface, wasn't initially interested in attacking. It was simply moving through its territory, keeping to itself. But the swimmer's presence had caught its attention. Sharks, like many creatures of the sea, react based on instinct, and in this moment, the shark saw Eric as a possible threat to its space. The morning sun reflected on the water as Eric turned onto his back, floating momentarily to enjoy the stillness. His eyes closed, lost in the rhythm of the ocean's movement. He felt safe, unaware that the lemon shark was getting closer just below him, circling slowly, its dark silhouette blending with the sea floor. The sudden force hit Eric before he could even process what was happening. A sharp pain shot through his right leg as something latched onto him with crushing force. His body stiffened, and his instincts kicked in. This was no wave or cramp. It was something alive, powerful, and dangerous. As he twisted in the water, Eric saw the large, unmistakable shape of a lemon shark, its teeth buried deep into his leg. The pain was unbearable, a burning sensation as the shark's jaws tightened. Eric's scream through the ocean's vastness swallowed the sound. He flailed in the water, trying to break free, but the shark wasn't letting go. Its grip was firm, dragging him under as it thrashed, its powerful body moving with terrifying speed. Desperation took over as Eric punched and kicked at the shark with everything he had. His fists slammed into the shark's snout, a spot he knew could be sensitive. And for a brief second, the shark released him. Blood filled the water around him, and Eric's vision blurred as he tried to swim away, his legs searing with pain. But before he could get far, the shark returned, its predatory instincts kicking in as it closed in for another attack. The shark's teeth grazed his thigh this time, slicing through flesh but not clamping down as hard. Eric kicked out again, his foot connecting with the shark's side, pushing it away just enough to give him a chance to escape. His arms and legs moved frantically, pulling him toward the shore, the taste of salt water and blood heavy in his mouth. He could see the beach now, but it seemed impossibly far as the panic and pain coursed through his body. On the beach, a few early risers had noticed the commotion. A woman walking her dog had seen the splashing and the unusual movements in the water. Realizing something was wrong, she began shouting for help. Another man, a jogger, sprinted toward the water, knowing that whoever was out there didn't have much time. Eric's strength was fading fast. His leg felt on fire, and every stroke was a battle to keep himself afloat. He glanced back, fearing the shark would come for him again. But for now, it had disappeared into the depths. He didn't know if it would return, but he had no time to think about it. His only focus was on reaching the shore. When Eric finally felt the sand beneath his hands, he collapsed onto the beach, gasping for air. His leg was mangled, blood pouring from the deep gashes where the shark had bitten him. The jogger and the woman rushed to his side, frantically calling for an ambulance. Eric's body trembled as the shock began to set in, his mind racing as he replayed the attack in his head, trying to make sense of it. As the beach filled with onlookers, many stood in stunned silence, staring at the blood-streaked water where the shark had attacked. They couldn't believe what had just happened. For Eric, the physical pain was overwhelming, but the mental scars would last far longer. The ocean, once a place of peace for him, had become a nightmare in seconds. Eric survived the attack, but his leg would never fully heal, the bite leaving deep scars both on his skin and in his memory. He would later tell the story of that day, describing the terror he felt as the shark dragged him under and his helplessness in the face of such a powerful predator. The waters of Boca Palms remained beautiful, but for Eric, they always reminded him of how quickly nature could turn on you. He never swam alone again. It was 2008, and Rachel Anderson was on the sunlit beaches of Fiji, ready to dive into the sea. The Mamanuca Islands and their surrounding sea shimmer in turquoise and teem with coral reef life. Rachel's job as a marine biologist had been to study such ecosystems, peer under every rock and crevice of the waves, and find all the secrets buried by the liquid blue. Fiji's rich biodiversity and coral gardens set an ideal scene for her most recent research. That day, Rachel was donning her wetsuit, going over the equipment with a fine-tooth comb before entering the still, transparent water. Her heart raced as she dropped further into the darkness. The sun filtered down from above into the caverns of the coral below. Many multicolored fish accompanied her, while bright corals swayed lightly in the current. This was her paradise. Rachel drifted with the current over the reef, taking detailed notes on the species of coral she passed by, and admiring their ability to resist climate change. However, the corals had her too preoccupied to notice one thing down in the crevices: lots and lots of giant moray eels. The moray eel stood with its long body and toothy smile different from the rest. Usually shy, they became hostile when cornered. As Rachel had been so engrossed, she had reached forward in her studies, jostling the eel's rocky hide slightly. The eel charged out of its lair in a cloud of silt. The adrenaline kicked in, alert to Rachel as though sensing danger. It was over instantly. The serene subaqueous landscape was a scene of turmoil. Swiftly, a rush and the moray eel exploded from its hole, its gaping mouth an inch from Rachel's arm. Lightning fast, more so than she could react, the eel tightly wound its long, thin, serpentine body around her. Panic seized Rachel. She desperately struggled for her freedom, where she had been on a peaceful dive only moments before. Rachel's training as a marine biologist took over. She remembered the actions of the moray eels. They bite when cornered. The fight-or-flight urge surged, but she realized that panic would only worsen her situation. So instead, she began to breathe and tried to remain calm in the face of the mounting tide of fear. Rachel was sure that a long time would pass with her arm trapped before her head could think again. She suddenly remembered the anatomy of eels. Their jaw structures are meant to grasp and hold rather than crush. That meant she could get free if she found some way to loosen its grip. Girding up her loins, she started wiggling about her arm to create space between the skin and the fearsome jaws of the eel. The moray eel sensed her movement, and it tightened its grip. Rachel knew the pressure was increasing, but she would not lose hope. All of a sudden, she remembered the small knife she always carried around her waist. It was for emergency purposes. With a quick twist, Rachel reached for the knife and her fingers touched the handle. It was a risk, but she had to try. Rachel drew her knife and held it toward the eel's body. She didn't want to hurt the creature. She just needed to disorient it as a means of escape. Pressing the blade to the side, she jerked hard, and the eel, taken by surprise, momentarily loosened its grip. Rachel jumped on the chance, yanked her arm free, and swam away from the aperture, her legs kicking and her heart racing. She swam up toward the surface. Once everything was in order, the water seemed like a sea of turbulence. As she ascended, Rachel turned around, half expecting the eel to follow her, but instead she saw it retreat into its rocky den and melt into the shadows of the reef. Relieved but shaken, Rachel broke the surface, gulping for air, the warm sun shining on her face. She floated there for a second, processing her harrowing adventure and the flood of feelings. Up the very instant she could, Rachel began to swim toward the boat, her mind running a mile a minute. She knew that marine life was unpredictable, but this was something entirely different again, one that made her respect the creatures that lived in the sea all the more. It was a potent reminder that danger lay just beneath the surface of beauty. As soon as she reached the boat, Rachel climbed aboard, and the crew members immediately noticed her pale face and wide eyes. They surrounded her, concern etched on their faces while she related her experience. While they had heard of such encounters before, first-hand witnessing it all left them in awe of the ocean's raw power. Rachel took the experience as a turning point in her career. She became an activist for more marine safety training for divers. Further, she emphasized the need to learn more about animal behavior vis-a-vis their response to humans when people are interacting with them in the wild. Her experience made her see marine biology differently, amalgamating her passion for research with education and safety. That nightmarish encounter with the moray eel had become one of the defining chapters of her life, shaping her role into what she functioned as an ocean saver. She was fascinated and respectful of the ocean, with beauty and unpredictability, mindful that underneath danger lies a world worth defending. It was June 7, 1996, a day that had started with bright skies and calm seas off the Bahamas coast. It was supposed to be a routine trip for Robert Darnell and his crew. Robert, 46, an experienced sailor, had set out with his brother Daniel and their two friends, Jack Monroe and Steve Callahan, on a week-long sailing adventure. They had planned to explore the remote islands in the Caribbean, taking in the beauty of the ocean. Their boat, the Sun Chaser, had been sturdy enough for the journey, or so they thought. The first few days went smoothly, the men bonding over shared stories, fishing, and enjoying the calm, open waters. They had been friends for years, often taking trips like this together to escape their daily routines. The boat had all the needed supplies, and they felt confident navigating through these waters. But the weather turned without warning. A sudden violent storm hit them late afternoon, far from any coastline. Dark clouds gathered quickly, the wind howled and the waves grew large, brutally crashing against the boat. The crew scrambled to control the sails, but the storm was relentless. The Sun Chaser was tossed around like a toy in the angry sea, and within hours their worst fear came true. The boat capsized. Water poured into the cabin, and the men barely had time to grab a life raft and some emergency supplies before the boat sank beneath the surface. The storm raged on, but they had no choice but to climb into the small inflatable raft and hold on. Their boat was gone, leaving them adrift in the open ocean, and they did not know how long it would be until they were rescued. The sea calmed as the storm finally passed, but they faced a new challenge. They were stranded miles from shore, with no food or water except for a small amount in their emergency kit. The scorching sun beat down on them and dehydration set in quickly. The vastness of the ocean around them was both beautiful and terrifying. No sign of land or any ships could come to their rescue. For the first day, they remained hopeful. They rationed their water, keeping their spirits up as best they could. But as the hours dragged on, the reality of their situation became clear. They were alone, floating in the endless blue, and their chances of survival grew slimmer with each passing moment. Then, on the second day, they noticed the fins. Oceanic white-tip sharks, known for their curiosity and aggressiveness, were common in these waters. Unlike many sharks, which typically avoid humans, the oceanic white-tip was known to be bold, especially when hungry. These sharks were opportunistic predators, and shipwreck survivors had often reported encounters with them. For Robert and his crew, the sight of the fins cutting through the water sent a chill through their already exhausted bodies. At first, the sharks simply circled the raft from a distance, watching the men with dark, unblinking eyes. There were 3 of them, their large bodies gliding effortlessly through the water. The sailors tried to remain calm, knowing that panicking would only worsen things. But as the hours passed, the sharks grew bolder, swimming closer to the raft, their fins cutting through the water rapidly. By the 3rd day, the sharks were no longer just circling. They began bumping the raft, testing its strength, their powerful bodies pushing against the small, inflatable craft. Robert and the others could feel the impacts each time a shark made contact, their hearts pounding as they realized how fragile their situation had become. The sharks were hungry, and their patience was wearing thin. The men tried to scare the sharks away by banging on the raft's sides with their makeshift paddles, but the predators were relentless. The smell of the men, weak and sweating under the heat, had drawn them in, and the sharks wouldn't leave without a fight. The crew knew they had to act fast. They fashioned crude weapons out of pieces of metal they had managed to salvage from the boat's wreckage, sharpening the ends as best they could. The first attack came just after noon. One of the sharks, larger than the others, launched at the raft, its powerful jaws clamping down on the side. The men screamed in horror as the shark's teeth tore into the rubber, puncturing the raft and sending water splashing into the boat. Robert grabbed one of their makeshift weapons and stabbed at the shark's head, striking it several times before it let go. Blood filled the water, but it wasn't enough to kill the shark, only to anger it. The shark thrashed wildly in the water, and the other 2 sharks began circling faster, sensing the chaos. Jack was the next to strike, jabbing at one of the approaching sharks as it came too close, its fin brushing against the side of the raft. The men were exhausted, their arms heavy, but adrenaline kept them going. They fought with everything they had, knowing one more breach could sink them, but the sharks were relentless. As the sun began to set, the men knew they couldn't keep this up much longer. Their raft was slowly taking on water, and the sharks showed no signs of retreating. Desperation set in as they realized that night was falling, and their chances of survival would be even lower in the dark. Suddenly, one of the sharks lunged again, aiming for Steve, who had been leaning too far over the raft's edge. The shark's massive jaws clamped down on his leg, terrifyingly pulling him into the water. Steve screamed, thrashing in the water as the shark tore into him, his blood mixing with the ocean as the other sharks moved in for the kill. Robert and Daniel tried to pull him back into the raft, but it was too late. The sharks were too fast, too strong. Steve's body disappeared beneath the surface, and the water around them turned red. The remaining 3 men watched in horror, their minds barely able to process what had just happened. The sharks continued to circle, but now the men knew they were next. The ocean had become a battleground, and they were losing. They fought off the sharks as best they could, but exhaustion and fear had taken their toll. With night approaching, they knew they wouldn't last much longer. When the Coast Guard finally found them, the raft was barely afloat. Robert, Daniel, and Jack were pulled from the water, weak and delirious, their bodies covered in wounds from the sharks' relentless attacks. Steve was never found. The ocean had claimed him, and the sharks had left only a bloody memory behind. The sailors would live to tell their story, but the scars, both physical and emotional, would remain with them forever. The ocean, once their playground, had turned into a nightmare, and the sight of a fin cutting through the water would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Waters off Durban, South Africa coast had always been a favorite spot for seasoned spearfisher Paul Mitchell. On March 18, 2003, Paul, a 35-year-old with over a decade of spearfishing experience, was preparing for what he expected to be a successful day in the ocean. The South African coastline, known for its rich marine life, was home to an array of fish species and, as every diver knew, some of the ocean's largest predators. But Paul was confident, skilled, and had faced his share of close encounters. That day, he was accompanied by his longtime friend and fellow spearfisher, Greg Ellis. The two had been diving together for years, relying on each other for safety in deeper waters. Paul was the more experienced of the two, but Greg had learned quickly, becoming a strong partner on these trips. Their plan for the day was simple: dive deep, target larger fish, and return with a solid catch before the afternoon heat kicked in. The sun was already rising when they reached their favorite dive spot. The water was clear, with perfect visibility and mild currents. They geared up, adjusted their weight belts, checked their spears, and descended into the water. Paul led the way, his body moving effortlessly through the depths, the spear gun ready. His heart raced with the familiar thrill of the dive, and his mind focused on the task. Paul had chosen this spot because it was known for its rich population of game fish, particularly yellowfin tuna. The deeper waters here could be challenging, but they had always yielded good results, and today they seemed the same. As they descended, fish darted in and out of view, their bodies reflecting the light filtering through the water. After a few minutes of scouting, Paul spotted his target, a large tuna hovering just above the seabed. He signaled to Greg to stay back as he slowly raised his spear gun. The shot was perfect. The spear pierced the fish cleanly, and Paul felt the familiar tug as the fish tried to escape. Blood immediately spilled into the water, spreading quickly as Paul began pulling the catch toward him. His adrenaline spiked, the satisfaction of the perfect shot filling him with confidence. But beneath the surface, the ocean's predators were already responding to the scent of blood. Durban's waters were home to various shark species, and tiger sharks were among the most feared. Known for their size, strength, and aggression, tiger sharks were opportunistic hunters, attracted by movement and the scent of blood in the water. Paul had always respected the dangers of these waters, but today, the reality of the threat was about to become far more personal. As Paul wrestled with the tuna, he didn't notice the dark shape gliding silently through the water. The tiger shark had been lurking nearby, drawn by the blood cloud from Paul's recent kill. Its senses were finely tuned, detecting the slightest disturbance. And now, it was closing in. Paul felt a shift in the water before he saw the shark. A powerful current surged past him, and he instinctively looked around, his heart skipping a beat as his eyes locked onto the unmistakable silhouette of a tiger shark. It was massive, easily over 12 feet long and heading straight for him. Panic gripped him momentarily, but his years of training kicked in. He knew exactly what to do. He released the line from his spear gun, letting the tuna drift away as a distraction. But the shark wasn't interested in the fish. It was focused on Paul, sensing both the blood and the movements of a new target. Paul's hand tightened around his spear as he began his ascent, kicking hard toward the surface, but he could feel the shark getting closer, its massive body slicing through the water with terrifying speed. Paul's mind raced. He knew the tiger shark was not a creature that would scare off easily. It was known for its persistence, especially once it had locked onto prey. He turned to face the shark, holding the spear gun out in front of him as a makeshift shield. The shark came in fast, its wide mouth lined with rows of sharp teeth visible as it closed the distance. With a sudden jolt, the shark struck. Its powerful head slammed into Paul, knocking him backward. The force of the impact sent him spiraling through the water, but he managed to keep hold of his spear gun. He kicked out, trying to distance himself, but the shark was relentless. It circled back, faster now, its eyes locked onto him as it prepared for another strike. Paul knew he had to act quickly. He aimed the spear gun at the shark's head, waiting for the right moment. As the shark lunged again, he fired. The spear struck just below its eye, not deep enough to kill, but enough to startle it. The shark thrashed, violently shaking its massive head. The spear lodged in its tough skin. Blood mixed with the water as the shark pulled back, disoriented for a moment. Paul didn't wait to see if the shot had done any lasting damage. He kicked upward with everything he had, his lungs burning as he raced toward the surface. The shark, though injured, wasn't giving up. It circled beneath him, slower now, but still dangerous. Paul could feel the water moving as the shark swam below him, and he knew it was only a matter of time before it attacked again. Greg was already there as he broke the surface, gasping for air, pulling him toward the boat. Paul scrambled aboard, his body shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline. They watched in horror as the shark's dorsal fin broke the surface, circling the boat for several more minutes before disappearing into the depths. Paul collapsed onto the deck, his breathing heavy, his heart racing. The close encounter had shaken him to his core. In all his years of spearfishing, he had never come face to face with such danger. The tiger shark had been relentless, and Paul knew he had been lucky to escape with his life. The day had started like any other for Simon Garrett. a professional diver with years of experience exploring the Great Barrier Reef. It was April 14, 2007, and Simon was alone, investigating a remote section of the reef known for its deep caves and narrow passages. The Great Barrier Reef, located off the northeastern coast of Australia, was one of the most breathtaking places Simon had ever dived. He had spent hours navigating its coral gardens and underwater tunnels, fascinated by the marine life that thrived there. On this particular day, Simon had chosen a new spot that he hadn't explored before. It was deeper, more isolated, and less frequented by tourists. The water was calm, and conditions were perfect for a long, quiet dive. Simon checked his gear, adjusted his mask, and descended into the blue. The familiar sensation of weightlessness took over as he swam downward. His air tank was full, and his dive computer showed plenty of time for exploration. He had always felt at peace in the water. The reef was like a second home to him, and Simon was confident in his abilities. His goal for the day was to explore a cave system hidden beneath layers of coral, rumored to be full of beautiful, untouched marine life. He ventured deeper, his flashlight cutting through the shadows as he entered the first tunnel. The coral walls shimmered, and schools of fish darted around him, making the cave come alive with movement. As Simon moved through the narrow passages, he took in the beauty of the place, losing track of time. Everything felt routine until he noticed something in the distance. A dark shape moved in the shadows ahead, just on the edge of his flashlight's beam. At first, Simon thought it might be a large fish or a stingray, but as he swam closer, he realized what it was. A reef shark resting in the narrow space, hidden among the coral. Reef sharks were common in the Great Barrier Reef. Unlike the more aggressive bull or tiger sharks, reef sharks were usually shy, often keeping their distance from divers. But they were also territorial, especially when disturbed in confined spaces like the cave Simon was now swimming through. Simon froze, his heart racing as the shark stirred, its sleek body shifting slightly in the tight space. The shark had been unaware of Simon's presence until now, but the disturbance was enough to set it on edge. The shark's movements became quicker, more erratic, and Simon knew he had to tread carefully. In the narrow confines of the cave, there was little room for error, and the shark now blocked the only exit. Simon's mind raced as he tried to stay calm. He knew sudden movements could provoke the shark. There was no way to swim around it in such a tight space. The shark turned slowly, its dark eyes fixed on Simon. It was a large one, at least 6 feet long, and its powerful body moved with grace, sending a wave of fear through him. Then, without warning, the shark charged. It moved with terrifying speed, its body slicing through the water toward Simon. He barely had time to react, pulling himself back against the cave wall, his heart pounding in his chest. The shark rushed past him so close he could feel the force of its movement. It didn't strike him, but its behavior was clear. It felt threatened, and Simon was trapped in its territory. The shark circled back, slower this time but still agitated. Simon's breathing became shallow as he tried to control his panic. His air supply was ticking down, and he knew he couldn't stay in the cave much longer. He had to find a way out before the shark attacked again. His spear gun, which he always carried for protection, was strapped to his side, but using it in such close quarters could provoke the shark further. Simon decided it was a last resort. The shark circled once more, its body gliding just inches from Simon as it passed. It was watching him, testing him, and Simon knew that any wrong move could trigger another charge. He slowly reached for his spear gun, keeping his movements as controlled as possible. The shark stopped circling, hovering before the exit, blocking his only way out. Simon's breathing became more rapid as the tension mounted. He was running out of options, and the shark wasn't moving. If he didn't act soon, he'd be out of the air with no clear escape. Taking a deep breath, Simon made his move. He pushed off the cave wall with a quick burst of energy, swimming toward the shark, hoping to spook it without forcing a confrontation. The shark reacted instantly, turning toward Simon with lightning speed, but instead of charging again, it darted away, its powerful body disappearing into the deeper water beyond the cave. Simon didn't waste a second. He swam as fast as he could toward the exit, his lungs burning as he kicked hard, pulling himself through the narrow opening. Once free from the cave, Simon ascended quickly, his chest tightening as his air supply dwindled. He broke the surface with a gasp, his body trembling from the adrenaline and the fear of what had just happened. The open water felt like a refuge, and he floated on his back momentarily, catching his breath and trying to process the terrifying encounter. Back on the boat, Simon sat quietly, replaying the event in his mind. He had come face to face with a reef shark in one of the most confined and dangerous situations imaginable, and lived to tell the tale. With all its beauty and wonder, the Great Barrier Reef also showed Simon how quickly things could go wrong. The ocean was a place he loved, but it was clear to him now that it held dangers he would never fully control. The summer of 2012. The sun shone over the Florida Keys and an amber light spilled across the turquoise waters. The small islands, full of multicolor coral reefs and varied fishes, were a great attraction for families aiming at adventures combined with relaxation. The Roberts had joined in and rented an extra-large yacht for the occasion. It would be a festive family reunion with everyone having a lovely time. But just under the surface, it was boiling over. Jack Thompson, the brash 25-year-old with a penchant for recklessness, always felt that his grandmother, Evelyn Roberts, nitpicked about everything. The septuagenarian Evelyn was sharp-tongued and fiercely independent, which earned her respect throughout the years and rendered her somewhat of a target for Jack's youthful arrogance. The years had soured their relationship, filling it with petty arguments and stubborn disagreements. The family had gathered, laughing and chattering on deck as the yacht bobbed gently in the waves. Fishy smells wafted from the tiny galley, but not everyone wanted to celebrate. Jack and Evelyn stood opposite the deck, exchanging heated glances across a room thick with unspoken words. Evelyn had just remarked upon the ludicrousness of Jack's swim trunks while wearing a favorite sun hat, worn everywhere and bejeweled with colorful flowers. Jack, feeling publicly humiliated before his cousins, snapped back a retort about her age and how she should act her age. It hung there, heavy and charged. Her face turned red with anger as Jack felt a surge of defiance. Determined to do so, Jack pushed Evelyn with a mighty shove, but halfway wanted her to stagger a few at least, tumble backward, and regain her position by getting up and back on her feet. Instead, she lost her balance and plunged headlong over the edge of the yacht with flailing arms into the water beneath them. The family gasped collectively and ran to the edge, their expressions filled with horror as they looked on. Little did Jack know then that the bull sharks, a very aggressive species that usually find themselves in more shallow coastal waters, were prowling underneath the yacht. The baiting fish and other marine animals have drawn these sharks into the middle of the area. Evelyn surfaced. She spluttered, shocked, the unmistakable silhouettes of sharks beginning to circle her. Shock turned to panic within the family. Jack's heart raced as he watched the scene, now fully realizing the gravity of what he had just done. Hitherto, he had just crossed the line and his grandmother was in danger now. His cousins shouted instructions at him, pulling life rings and poles from the deck and throwing them toward Evelyn, desperate to rescue her. Evelyn fought to keep her head above water, instinct setting in at the memory of years of swimming lessons and how tough she was. The sharks, however, were attracted by the commotion, a part of fear and guilt mixed in Jack. He couldn't bear seeing his grandmother getting eaten. He dived in head first. The cold water shocked him, and his heart throbbed with adrenaline at the sudden temperature change. Shock led to this cold shaking of water, but he quickly focused on Evelyn, now thrashing about in a panic. Jack swam towards her, pushing aside his fear of the circling sharks. He knew he had to reach her before it was too late. As he reached Evelyn, the shadows of the sharks swelled to engulf them, their dorsal fins slicing the water with a sinister purpose. He shouted for her to go for him, but the call was smothered in the cacophony of splashing water before her. There was a fight for breath within Evelyn, but finally, she saw Jack and reached out. At the same time, he yanked her arm toward him. The water swirled the edges of them. Even as the family watched, horrified, not cheering him on, quiet, not wanting to do anything to influence Jack, they also flung the life rings and poles nearer to the two floundering figures in the water. He could feel the moment pressing down on him, but Jack focused on getting Evelyn to safety. He stroked powerfully to pull them both to the nearest life ring. Evelyn seized Jack's arm, her fear palpable. The sharks still circled, sharp, quick movements that spoke of predators. Jack's mind raced as he tried to work out their next moves. At last, they reached the life ring. and Jack wrapped an arm around it, pulling Evelyn to him. He raised his eyes to his family, who were leaning out over the side of the yacht, hope and horror written across their faces. They had managed to maneuver a pole within his reach. With one hand gripping the life ring and the other gripping the pole, he signaled for somebody to do something. Amid the cries, they worked with one accord, pulling Jack and Evelyn toward the yacht side using the pole. The sharks felt the commotion when approaching the side and probably got bored, disappearing off toward the deeper waters. The family finally gave in to relief to pull Evelyn and Jack to the top deck. Breathless and shaken, Jack hauled himself over the side of the yacht with his grandmother. Immediately, water streamed from Evelyn's mouth as she coughed and sputtered. Jack collapsed on his knees beside her in safety, panic and guilt flooding over him. He had never been so scared and regretted anything as much as he did then. Evelyn was still gasping for breath when she turned to Jack in disbelief and anger. The family closed in around them, checking for any injuries, but emotional ones ran more profound than any flesh wound. Jack could see the disappointment in their eyes, and that stung more than any shark bite. As the adrenaline wore off, so did the shock. With her strength returning, Evelyn sat up and glared at Jack. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the low gurgle of the waves against the yacht. Jack knew he deserved her anger. He had just placed his grandmother directly in harm's way, and the realization was unbearable. In the following days, the family tried to recover from what happened. Jack tried to earn everyone back by doing all the chores and listening to Evelyn's stories, which he used to tune out. He realized the ocean can be beautiful and a formidable force, like family bonds. The experience saw them bond closer, both realizing how fragile life was. Jack and Evelyn started understanding each other. They even laughed together about their narrowly missed disaster. Jack did learn that the ocean is mighty and deserves respect. Evelyn softened, and for the first time began to appreciate her grandson, who was working to make amends. As they stood on the deck meeting again for the next time, a few years afterward, laughter rang out across the water. Jack and Evelyn exchanged glances, knowing they had been through so much and had come out stronger for it. The Florida Keys served as a backdrop for adventure and all the encounters. Love, forgiveness, and some of life's harsh realities. The Gold Coast in Australia, known for its beautiful beaches and calm waters, was the perfect place for the McAllister family to celebrate their youngest son's birthday. It was January 17th, 1995, a bright summer day, and the family had been looking forward to this day for months. The McAllisters, James, 42, his wife Sarah, 39, and their 3 children, Liam, 16, Megan, 14, and Oliver, who had just turned 9, had rented a small boat for the occasion. They planned to spend the day on the water, swimming, fishing, and relaxing. They had done this before, and the waters of the Gold Coast had always been a source of happiness and tranquility. The boat was small but perfect for a family outing. It had a small cabin and plenty of space to store their fishing gear and picnic supplies. The day had been filled with laughter as they sailed a few miles offshore, still within sight of the coast. Oliver, excited for his birthday, had caught his first fish, and the family had spent hours enjoying the sun and sea breeze. By mid-afternoon, they anchored the boat in a seemingly calm, shallow area to swim quickly before heading back to shore. The waters around Australia, particularly the Gold Coast, were known for great white sharks. These massive predators could reach up to 20 feet in length and were apex hunters, capable of sensing the slightest movement in the water from miles away. While attacks were rare, locals knew the risks, but the McAllisters, like many tourists, weren't overly concerned. The sun was bright, the sea was clear, and the water looked inviting. James had checked the depth and felt confident they were in safe territory. The family gathered on the deck, their voices rising excitedly as they prepared for one last swim before heading home. Liam and Megan were the first to dive into the water, splashing each other and laughing as Oliver waited for his dad to help him into the water. Watching from the boat, Sarah smiled at her children, content in the day's joy. Unbeknownst to them, far below the surface, a great white shark was prowling the waters, drawn by the vibrations of the family's playful splashing. It had been hunting along the coast, and now, sensing potential prey, it moved swiftly, its powerful body cutting through the depths. The shark was massive, nearly 18 feet long, with rows of razor-sharp teeth designed for tearing flesh. It had detected the family from a distance and was now closing in. Without warning, the water around Liam suddenly erupted. One moment he was laughing with his sister. The next he was yanked beneath the surface. A flash of silver and white moved through the water and a scream pierced the air. Megan, just a few feet away, froze in horror as the dark shape of the great white shark became clear. James leaped into the water, frantically swimming toward Liam, who had surfaced briefly, blood streaming from a deep wound in his leg. But before James could reach him, the shark struck again, its massive jaws clamping down on Liam's torso, pulling him under. The water turned red as the shark thrashed violently, shaking its prey with incredible force. Panic swept over the family. Sarah screamed from the boat, trying to grab Oliver, who had been about to jump into the water, while Megan swam back toward the ship in terror, desperately trying to escape the carnage unfolding around her. But the shark wasn't finished. It turned toward Megan in a flash, its black eyes locking onto her. Before she could pull herself back onto the boat, the shark lunged, its powerful jaws catching her by the waist. Megan let out a scream, her hand slipping from the boat's edge as the shark dragged her into the depths. The water around her churned violently, and her small body was no match for the predator's strength. Blood filled the water once again as James tried to reach his daughter. But it was too late. Sarah clung to Oliver, who was now sobbing uncontrollably. His birthday joy turned into unimaginable horror. She watched helplessly as her husband, desperate to save his children, swam toward the chaos. But the shark was relentless. It came back for James, its speed and power overwhelming. With a single, brutal strike, it grabbed him by the legs, pulling him under just as it had done to Liam. The water frothed as the shark twisted and tore at James, his struggles weakening until they stopped. Now only Sarah and Oliver remained. The boat rocked as the shark circled, its dorsal fins slicing through the water, searching for its next target. Sarah knew they had to escape the water, but she was afraid. Her heart raced as she held onto her son, praying for a miracle. But the shark wasn't done. In one final, devastating attack, the shark rammed the side of the boat, knocking Sarah and Oliver into the water. The force of the impact left them disoriented, and the shark struck before Sarah could regain her bearings. Its jaws closed around her midsection, pulling her down with brutal force. Now floating helplessly nearby, Oliver screamed for his mother, but the shark quickly turned its attention to him. In an instant, it dragged him under, his small body disappearing beneath the bloodied sea. The Coast Guard, alerted by another nearby boat that had witnessed part of the attack, arrived minutes later. But by the time they reached the scene, the water was still. Only bits of debris and a red stain on the water remained as a silent testament to the unfolding carnage. They could do nothing when the Coast Guard pulled up to the wreckage. The shark had vanished, and the McAllisters were gone, devoured by the ocean's most fearsome predator. Only a few boat pieces remained, drifting aimlessly in the blood-streaked waters. The Gold Coast community was shocked and struggled to comprehend the tragedy. It was a reminder of the untamed power of the sea, where even a day of celebration could turn into a nightmare in a matter of moments. Summer 2013 was spent in the Bahamas with crystalline waters and immensely colorful marine life. Situated in the Caribbean, this archipelago featured breathtaking coral reefs filled with fish of any color, and the most unusual underwater landscapes. At the age of 35, Mike Anderson was a very enthusiastic snorkeler. He had made his forays into the Bahamas for years. Each trip was a chance to plunge him into the determined sea depth, into the great mystery that fused with him to establish a close relationship with nature. His enthusiasm flickered like fire, and he was all set to have yet another snorkeling experience. In his bright blue jumpsuit, strapping on all his snorkel gear with the sun glinting off the shiny equipment, he felt like a superhero, ready to venture into the wonders beneath the waves. When Mike slipped into the water, he was bombarded by color and life. Schools of fish swam about, glinting in the sunlight and lighting up the coral formations like 1,000 tiny jewels. The sea plants swayed gently in the ocean currents, performing a shimmering dance. He floated, taking deep breaths, allowing the ocean's quiet to sink into his skull. Little did he know that this peaceful adventure would turn dark on him. Mike locked onto a flash of movement far ahead as he drifted along. That intrigued his heart, and he swam faster, excited to see that strange movement being created. He realized it was a big, great barracuda as he got closer. Its slim body was slicing the water with the grace of something almost predatory. Its silver skin pulled the sun's light from above and drew his eye to it, nearly as if he were a moth to that flame. Initially, Mike felt awe regarding the barracuda and its pointed beauty, complete with razor-sharp teeth glinting ominously. But as the barracuda swam closer, Mike's fascination turned to unease. He could feel the creature's eyes on him, the black pupils locked onto the shiny objects of his snorkel gear. The barracuda began to circle him lazily. What seemed slow, deliberate motions caused Mike to believe he was being sized up for the kill. Mike's heart pounded with memories of stories shared by fellow snorkeling buddies that barracudas were attracted to shiny, reflective things that they mistook for food. A surge of panic filled him as he realized his predicament fully. The calm waters he was comfortable with a moment ago were like an ominous death trap closing on him in stealth. He struggled with his nerves, realizing he could easily provoke the fish. Mike began swimming back to his boat with purposeful strokes, which rested a short distance away on the surface. He carefully kept his movements slow and sure, trying not to turn his head with the tension of the barracuda. With tension like that, each flick of his fins seemed magnified as the atmosphere hung thick with water. The big barracuda circled repeatedly, each sweep closer to Mike than the last. Its sharp, razor-edged teeth glinted in the sunlight, and Mike wondered if he had miscalculated the fish's curiosity, or if it was hungry. He quickly focused on the boat, visualizing climbing aboard and escaping the situation. But the constant fear gnawed at his insides. As he swam, Mike's mind was filled with thoughts about the oceanic predators he had always admired from afar. Though he had read many books and seen most of the marine habitats in documentaries on television, nothing came close to experiencing it. Here he was, a trespasser on the barracuda's home ground, with a fair measure of respect for the creature as he quaked with fear. Every stroke was heavier than the preceding one, and consequently the distance that separated him from the boat appeared interminable. Mike increased the frequency of his panting, his heart beating uncontrollably. The barracuda felt behind him, its dark shadow hanging in the deep. He resisted the temptation to look behind him. He knew it only served to increase his anxiety. Almost immediately, the barracuda approached again, closer than before. He felt his instincts surge and kicked harder, thrashing his body through the water with increased emergency. But the fish didn't give in. It shredded the waves with its lean body, coming closer after each pass. Mike's mind raced as he remembered stories of snorkelers who said that a barracuda, marginally mishmash, had confronted them. Finally, he reached the boat's side, where he clung to the ladder with trembling fingers. Not daring to let go, he caught his breath, peering toward the barracuda. Thankfully, it had stopped its pursuit and hung a few feet away, almost as if Mike's sudden rising stupefied it. Mike could see the glint of sharp teeth, but no attack was visible. Maybe it did not care or was waiting for his next attempt. One final heave had him on board and gasping, with adrenaline running at the speed of a racehorse. He fell flat on the deck face down, gasping for breath. The magnitude of the encounter came crashing down on him. The dark shadow of the barracuda circled beneath the boat as an ominous reminder. He was momentarily frightened and awed simultaneously. He had escaped, but not without a new regard for the ocean's predators. He lay on the deck, feeling the sun's warmth seeping into his skin as Mike reflected on what had happened. He had seen how quickly the calm beauty of the ocean could turn into an emergency. He knows the barracuda had responded out of its environment and was driven by instinct, something Mike had to acknowledge. That incident would forever change how he viewed snorkeling and the sea. Days later, returning home to the Bahamas, he once more felt attracted to the waters where he had met the great barracuda. This time, he entered the ocean reverently, thankful for the lessons he had learned. He had learned a deep appreciation for the beauty of the sea and its hidden dangers. Grinning, he floated there in the warm waters of the Bahamas, thanking the journey that had turned him into this snorkeler. In the summer of 2011, the sun scorched above the beautiful coastline of Oahu, Hawaii. With its stunning beaches and colorful marine life, this island became a place for most surfers. This ever sound of tides from the Pacific Ocean and the breaking waves on the beach relieved any monotonous eye. It was in a beautiful setting with an undercurrent of danger from different species of sharks within the waters, though, the mighty hammerhead among them. Josh Burnett was a 28-year-old surfer known for riding the most challenging waves. His commitment to the ocean was reflected in the depth of his tan and sun-bleached hair. Waves that day were ideal, clean, forceful, and beckoning. With a gentle breeze shifting through the palm trees lining the beach, it almost felt like the perfect scene for an exciting surfing session. He felt the adrenaline rush as he paddled out. The water was rich in hue, deep aquamarine and luminous with sunbeams. Josh lay on the board waiting for the next big one to lift. The ocean was alive, pulsating with energy, and he relished every moment of being wrapped in its embrace. He couldn't have known that this beautiful day would shortly turn to the chilling. After catching a few sound waves, Josh saw something strange moving below in the depths. Something very sneaky was moving underwater, creating the ripple that had caught his eye. He peered into the water, trying to focus on what it was. First, he dismissed it as some trick of the light or maybe even a school of fish. Then, leaning on his board, he saw a blade fin surface, a fluid glide that moved with ominous intent against the background of a living, pulsing ocean. Josh's heart jumped slightly as he watched the fin shape, tall and wide, tapering into a distinctive hammerhead. A wave of panic surged through him. He had read enough about shark behavior to know that this particular species could be curious but potentially dangerous. The hammerhead began circling him, attracted by the vibrations of his board. A predator interested in looking at the possible prey. Josh instinctively remembered what older, experienced surfers had told him to do when confronted with sharks. He began paddling slowly, deliberately, keeping his movements fluid so as not to startle the creature. His heart raced, yet he focused on the rhythm of his breathing and tried to match it with the gentle roll of the ocean beneath him. He could see what the hammerhead was doing as he paddled his board, circling, studying him with wide eyes to determine whether he was a threat or mealtime. Josh knew that sudden movement might aggravate a shark. He suppressed his panic and focused on returning to shore while trying to lock eyes on the creature. Josh paddled slowly and deliberately, feeling the sun's warmth on his back but acutely aware of the cold reality below him. The hammerhead shark kept circling, and Josh noted its size, more extensive than he had thought before, more than 10 feet long. He recalled the stories of surfers who had had similar encounters, some getting free and others unlucky. With each stroke, Josh's mind raced. He considered his options. He could try to make a break for it or paddle calmly, hoping the creature would get bored. He decided on the latter, following his gut and ocean knowledge. He scanned the horizon with his paddle, searching for other surfers or boats. The beach was usually animated, but now it seemed devoid of life. He saw some surfers down the coast, oblivious to his situation. A surge of frustration flushed over him as he wished he could signal them. But the hammerhead shark stayed close, acutely attuned to any disturbance. Every minute seemed like an hour as he kept backing away cautiously. Though still circling, the hammerhead shark did not press the attack. Much like when riding waves, Josh concentrated on his technique. He paddled precisely, his body tight but controlled. Yet with each stroke closer to safety, that shark remained, much like a harbinger of the ocean's unpredictability. Then, just as the hope was about to fade, the shark suddenly changed direction and swam out of sight into the deep blue water. A surge of relief washed over Josh, but he knew better than to let his guard down. He kept paddling as he watched the water for any signs of the shark returning. The closer he came to the shallows, the more he could see the sandy floor. The water grew warmer, and far away he heard laughter and chatter from the beach. Gathering all his strength, he paddled on, the adrenaline sending him forward. With a final push, he felt his board glide over the sand and clambered off, stumbling into the shallows. Josh bobbed in chest-deep water, blowing and snorting as he surveyed the sea for any sign of the hammerhead. The adrenaline rush was fading, replaced by a sense of joy mixed with disbelief. He had faced down a shark and lived to tell about it. The beach was alive with people now, families, friends, and fellow surfers. None knew what sort of danger he had narrowly squeaked his way past. He walked back to shore with a new respect for the ocean. It was a beautiful beast that commanded respect. Josh reflected on the rush of excitement with the underlying dangers of surfing. This would be part of his story, a lesson in love and respect for humans' relationship with the creatures of the ocean. The story of Josh's terrifying encounter with the hammerhead became legendary among local surfers over the years. Told around the campfires and in the shops, it was a story that warned and inspired simultaneously. Josh Burnett faced his fears and became stronger because of them. A very clear epitome of the invincible spirit found within those who dare to ride the waves. Ultimately, it wasn't that surfing thrill, but respecting the ocean and its creatures, knowing that every wave could bring something remarkable or terrifying. In this understanding, Josh found a deeper connection to his beloved ocean, its beauty and dangers. In the summer of 2015, Anna Whitaker was found at the shores of the Pacific Ocean, more precisely, of the striking coastline of Monterey, California. Such was the fame of this area with its impressive forests of giant kelp and prolific sea creatures, a natural haven for kayakers and nature lovers. Gentle waves stroked ashore as the salty breeze carried faraway cries of seagulls. Once possessing a rich maritime history, Monterey was abuzz with whalers and fishermen. It has become a home ground for many marine animals, and people visit this place to experience an undersea adventure. Anna was a feisty 32-year-old who never avoided an excellent thrill or challenge. She paddled her trusty kayak, bright yellow and named Sunny, in the emerald green waters, weaving her way with the tide between towering stalks of kelp that danced in an underwater ballet. The sun cast its golden colors across the sea, and Anna felt deeply connected to such loveliness in the ocean, as unaware of the lurking danger beneath the surface as one could get. Anna paddled more profoundly into the kelp forest, reveling in the peacefulness of that moment. She took in the swaying kelp that provided shelter for fish and other sea creatures. It was nearly magical, and she couldn't help but smile around the idea that life was going on unbeknownst to her. Her tranquil paddle was short-lived, though. She was brought back to awareness with an extraordinary feeling. Suddenly, her kayak began tugging to one side, jerking her out of her reverie. First, she thought the currents were playing tricks on her. Then there was the tugging again, pulling her kayak backward with alarming force. She turned to investigate with a racing heart. Much to her surprise, a vast tentacle came out from the depths of the water, wrapping itself around the side of her boat. It was a giant Pacific octopus, its splotched skin glistening shades of blue and brown, mistaking Anna's kayak for some unsuspecting prey. Panic flooded Anna as she realized things were worse than she had thought. By its grip, the octopus was dragging Sunny deeper into the water. She could feel the tips of the kayak slipping precariously, with water slamming against the sides. She thought fast. Such encounters had been shared, but she never thought it would be her case. She clamped down on her paddle, knowing she had to get away. Her paddle swung hugely, connecting with a soft, wet thud to the tentacle that gripped her kayak. But its hold tightened. It was a battle of strength and wits, and Anna knew she had to think fast. The octopus was intelligent. It could solve problems, and Anna needed to outsmart it. She remembered now what he'd said while she kept thumping away at the tentacle. Staying calm was the key. Taking a deep breath, Anna refocused. The kelp was thick in there, and she could use it to her advantage. With renewed adrenaline, she paddled the kayak from the octopus toward a clump of dense kelp. The octopus seemed interested, perhaps slightly puzzled, and momentarily relaxed its hold. Anna took the opportunity to paddle furiously, sending Sunny into the safety of the kelp. The fronds wrapped around her kayak, creating a natural barrier between her and the creature, yet she knew this to be only a reprieve. Unfazed by this, the octopus continued to move through the kelp, its tentacles feeling for her. Anna's heart pounded while water swirled around her. She needed a plan. She remembered how the octopuses were agile and clever, and now considered using that against it. Anna, partially hidden behind a kelp wall in her kayak, knew she needed to make a diversion. She picked up the little waterproof bag containing her lunch and tossed it into the water. The bag splashed and bobbed away, alerting the octopus with its fish snack contents. The two tentacles moved gracefully in the current and shot out toward the bait. This was Anna's chance. She paddled away from her hiding place as quietly as possible. The octopus was now entirely engrossed in its pursuit of the snack and seemed quite blind to her escape. Relieved, yet feeling urgent, Anna started to paddle back toward shore, her muscles straining with each stroke. She paddled away, turned, and saw the octopus twisting and turning in a mesmerizing dance, oblivious to her leaving. Empathy hit her for the poor creature, acting simply upon its instincts. Another surge came over her, triumph. She outsmarted one of the ocean's most cunning predators. Finally, Anna beached Sunny on the soft sand, still gasping. The adrenaline gave way to relief and a new regard for the ocean's other creatures. She'd faced up to a giant octopus and come out the winner, but the battle had changed her. Anna sat in the warm sand, reflecting on her experience. The ocean was indeed an enigma, and she had foreseen that. She thanked the balance of life under the sea and was made fully aware that every creature serves such biodiversity. This encounter, scary as it was, expanded her perspective on the wonders of nature. As she gathered her gear, Anna knew that the battle with a giant octopus had marked her. But it was much more than just excitement. The core of it held a moral, resilience, and respect for nature. She came out of the kayaking adventure as a survivor and storyteller, willing to share wisdom with the rest of the world into the delicate balance of life in the deep blue sea.